You know that person who used to care about all the things society told them to care about? The promotions, the social status, the material possessions, and then one day they just stopped? Not because they became lazy or depressed, but because something fundamentally shifted in how they see reality. And now everyone around them thinks they've lost their mind, when really, they might have found something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Spiritual awakening isn't some mystical woo-woo concept reserved for monks on mountaintops. It's a legitimate psychological phenomenon that happens when your brain can no longer sustain the illusions it built to keep you comfortable. And once it happens, there's no going back. Let's start with what actually triggers a spiritual awakening, because it's almost never what people think. It's not reading a book or taking a trip to India. It's usually trauma. Deep, soul-crushing trauma that shatters every belief system you had about how life works. A sudden loss, a betrayal that destroys your trust, a near-death experience, a complete breakdown of everything you thought was real. Psychologists call this ego death, the moment when your constructed sense of self, the identity you spent decades building, completely collapses. And in that collapse, something else emerges. A awareness that you're not who you thought you were, that everything you've been chasing was a distraction from something deeper. Studies from the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology show that people who experience spiritual awakening often go through what's called the dark night of the soul first. It's this period of intense existential crisis where nothing makes sense anymore. Your old life feels fake, your relationships feel hollow, your goals feel meaningless. You're not depressed. You're seeing through the illusion for the first time. And it's terrifying. Here's what's happening in your brain during this process. Your default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for self-referential thinking and ego maintenance, it starts quieting down. fMRI studies on long-term meditators show decreased activity in this region, but you don't need to meditate for years to experience this. Severe trauma can trigger the same neurological shift overnight. And here's where it gets interesting. Spiritually awakened people often develop what researchers call non-dual awareness. The ability to see that the separation between self and other, between observer and observed, is a mental construct, not in a theoretical way. They actually experience reality without that filter. And once you experience that even once, you can't unsee it. But let's talk about what this actually looks like in everyday life, because this is where people get confused. Spiritually awakened people don't become emotionless robots or enlightened saints. They still feel pain, they still get frustrated, they still have bills to pay. The difference is they no longer identify with those experiences as who they are. Research from Carl Jung talks about individuation, this process of integrating all parts of yourself, the shadow, the light, everything you've repressed. Spiritual awakening is essentially forced individualization. Your psyche basically says we're done hiding from the truth and drags everything into consciousness whether you're ready or not. And here's something nobody tells you. Spiritually awakened people often become incredibly lonely. Not because they want to be alone, but because they can no longer engage in the surface-level interactions that used to fill their time. Small talk feels excruciating. Gossip feels toxic. Complaining about mundane problems feels like a waste of breath. And suddenly, all their old friendships don't work anymore. Studies show that people who undergo significant consciousness shifts often experience what's called spiritual emergence. It's this period where you're caught between two worlds. You can see the matrix, the conditioning, the programming that runs most people's lives, but you're still physically stuck in a society built on those illusions. It's like being the only sober person at a party where everyone's blackout drunk. Here's what makes this so psychologically challenging. Your brain is literally rewiring itself. Neuroplasticity research shows that significant shifts in consciousness create new neural pathways while pruning old ones. You're not the same person you were before. Your values change. Your priorities shift. Things that used to bring you joy now feel empty. Things you never noticed before now feel profound. And let's address the elephant in the room. Society treats spiritually awakened people like they're having a mental breakdown, because from the outside, it looks the same. Someone quits their high-paying job to pursue meaning, leaves a stable relationship because it feels inauthentic, withdraws from social circles that no longer resonate, stops caring about status symbols and societal expectations. But here's the difference between a breakdown and a breakthrough. A breakdown leaves you fractured, unable to function, stuck in chaos. A breakthrough integrates that chaos into a deeper understanding of reality. You're not running from life. You're finally showing up for it fully, without the masks, without the performance, without the need to be anything other than what you are. Research from transpersonal psychology, pioneered by people like Stanislav Grof and Abraham Maslow, shows that spiritual experiences often follow a predictable pattern. First, there's the shattering, then the void, where nothing makes sense, then the integration, where you rebuild your understanding of reality from the ground up, and finally, the return, where you come back to ordinary life but you're fundamentally changed. Here's what spiritually awakened people understand that others don't. Suffering is optional. Pain is inevitable. But suffering is the story you tell yourself about that pain. And once you see that your thoughts aren't you, that your emotions aren't you, that even your sense of self is just another thought, suffering loses its grip. But there's a dark side to this that nobody talks about. Some people get stuck in what's called spiritual bypassing. They use awakening as an excuse to avoid dealing with real problems. Everything happens for a reason becomes a way to dodge accountability. It's all an illusion becomes justification for not showing up in relationships. True awakening doesn't make you detached from life. It makes you more present to it. Studies on post-traumatic growth show that people who integrate traumatic experiences often develop deeper meaning, stronger relationships, and greater appreciation for life. Spiritual awakening is essentially accelerated post-traumatic growth. You're not escaping reality. You're finally seeing it clearly for the first time. And here's something that messes with people. Spiritually awakened individuals often lose their fear of death, not in a suicidal way, in a liberated way. Because once you realize that the you thought you were is a construct, death stops being the end of you and starts being the end of an idea. And that shift changes everything about how you live. Research shows that people who've had near-death experiences or profound spiritual awakenings report decreased fear of death and increased meaning in life. They stop postponing joy, stop tolerating toxicity, stop living for some future moment that never comes, because they've touched something that made them realize now is all there is. But let's be brutally honest about something. Most people don't want spiritual awakening. They want comfort. They want their illusions intact. They want to believe their job matters, their achievements define them, their possessions make them worthy. And there's nothing wrong with that. Awakening isn't superior. It's just different, and it comes with a cost. The cost is you can never go back to sleepwalking through life. You can't unknow what you've learned. You can't unsee what you've seen. You're awake in a world of people still dreaming, and you have to find a way to be okay with that, to let them dream, to stop trying to wake them up, to accept that everyone's on their own timeline. Here's what integration looks like. You still participate in society. You still work, pay bills, maintain relationships, but you're no longer attached to outcomes. You're no longer seeking validation from external sources. You're no longer building an identity based on achievements or possessions. You just exist, fully present, responding to life as it unfolds. Studies on long-term meditators and mystics across cultures show remarkable similarities. Decreased reactivity, increased equanimity, a sense of interconnectedness with all beings. Not as a belief system, but as a lived experience. They're not trying to be spiritual, they just are. It's as natural as breathing. So if you're someone who feels like you've woken up in a world that's still asleep, if nothing that used to matter matters anymore, if you're seeing through the illusions and it's making you feel crazy, here's what you need to know. You're not losing your mind. You're finding it. Your consciousness is expanding beyond the narrow confines of ego and identity. And yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's disorienting. Yes, it makes you question everything. But on the other side of that confusion is a clarity most people never touch. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. A joy that isn't tied to outcomes. A presence that makes every moment feel sacred. The journey doesn't end. There's no final destination where you've arrived and achieved enlightenment. It's a continuous unfolding, a constant letting go of who you thought you were to make space for what you actually are. And that's both terrifying and beautiful. Tell me, have you experienced a spiritual awakening? What shattered your illusions? Drop it in the comments. And if this video just described your exact experience or you enjoyed our content, please hit subscribe. I would genuinely appreciate your support.